The next level of diversity, going a step higher, is species diversity. This is usually what we think of when we think of biodiversity, is how many different types of X, Y, and Z are there. Well, what's a species to begin with? It's a group of organisms that can reproduce with one another, and they make offspring with one another, but those offspring have to be viable. They have to be fertile, meaning they have to be able to reproduce themselves. So, for example, here we have horse, and this is a donkey. If you breed them, you get a mule. A mule, kind of like, a blend really of the two. A mule is not a species. Yes, they were made from something, but they can't reproduce. You can't take a mule and a mule, breed them together, and they make babies. Essentially, nature has prevented that from happening. Nature has prevented that mule from being able to reproduce, usually because it has to do with number of chromosomes. Lions and tigers, you can breed them and make a liger, but that liger is not a species. That liger cannot reproduce. So we wouldn't consider that a species. Regardless, so when we're talking about species diversity, just keep in mind we're not talking about all these crazy hybrids you can make. It's things that are in the wild that can breed and reproduce and make offspring that reproduce as well. Now we have millions of species, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but millions of them. How do we keep track of them? We have names for them like a black bear or a Siberian tiger, but we have so many languages around the world and so many different names for organisms around the world as well. So how can we classify them in a universal way, in a global way, so that if I'm talking about this specific bird, someone in Japan can talk about that bird and we're talking about the same thing? And we can do that with a species classification. You've probably heard of the classification when thinking about humans. Humans are Homo sapiens. So this classification that maybe you've seen at some point in your life was developed by scientist Carl Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus created the idea of a classification used not just for animals, but for plants and even bacteria. And it's used worldwide. It's used in scientific papers, it's used in popular magazines. So he created this classification going all the way from life, so everything, to a species. And it's used to name organisms, but also to group organisms that are similar to one another. Now this binomial nomenclature here I have shown for humans. Humans, as I mentioned before, are Homo sapiens. Homo is the genus we are in. Sapiens is the specific species we are. We are actually the only organisms in genus, in the Homo genus. Homo neanderthalis, or the Neanderthals, were also in the Homo genus, but have since gone extinct. It's very important that you know this classification, not of humans per se, but of this. So life, not really a classification. Domain. So domain is the largest classification. This contains the most number of organisms. In the case of humans, we're in eukarya. But again, this you don't need to know. I'm not going to ask you, what kingdom are we in or what order are we in. So we go from domain down to kingdom. You may have learned about the 5 kingdoms at some point in your life. As for animals, plants, fungi, we have protists, and then previously we had bacteria. There's some classifications going on, but you've probably heard of those before. Us as humans, we're in Animalia. Then we go to phylum, class, order, and family, and then finally what makes up the species name being the genus and species. Now, a lot of these words probably mean nothing to you. So one way that I remembered this, probably since, 2nd or 3rd grade, and I still remember it, is I do kind of a mnemonic. So I use the D as, let's write it here. Deer, Use this K for king. We use this P for Philip. I'm going to use this C for class. Oh, whoops, no. Sorry, it stands for class. For came. O for over. F for for. G for green. And S for spaghetti. As you can tell, something made up in elementary school. But it's stuck, so I guess it worked. So essentially, if you can remember the saying, "Dear King Philip came over for green spaghetti," that gives you the first letter. You got the D, K, P, C, O, F, G, S. So at least remembering that order, because you'll be on the test, you'll be given those words. So you will have those words given to you. You just need to know what order to put them in. So you don't have to use that mnemonic. I use it. It helps me. But knowing that domain being the biggest, it has the most number of organisms in it, and the species is just one organism. Once you go all the way through this classification, there'll be one organism left. I'm going to give you another example. Again, you don't need to know the specifics, but kind of just demonstrating how this classification works. So the domain level, here you can see all sorts of organisms from, mushrooms and, starfish to dolphins, and we're trying to get down to this black bear. At the kingdom, we're just looking at animals, so we're getting rid of the plants and everything. Chordata are things with backbones, so these are all things with backbones. Mammalia, these are mammals, including us. So now we're trimming it down to mammals. All right, carnivores, which humans are not in. We're only looking at carnivores. Then we have our general bears, then our true bears, and then finally within the Ursus genus, we have Ursus americanus, which is the American black bear. Again, here's that genus name, Ursus, you can see that here. And then Americanus, that would be the species name. I can also say the species name is Ursus americanus. Just know Americanus is species, Ursus is genus. You put them together to create that species name. And this Ursus americanus is recognized everywhere around the world. This Latin name is used everywhere. This classification is used everywhere. So on Earth, we have about 1.74 million species identified. So we could name 1.74 million species. I shouldn't say name. Not all of them have names yet. But that's a lot of species. There are scientists who study all of these. And that could be you one day. One day you could be the person who discovers the 1,740,001 species. Of these species, so you see a couple of different, graphs going on here. So it's this one right here you want to focus on. This is showing all of those species. As you can see, that insects rule the world. Over half of those nearly 2 million species are insects. Yeah, so they're everywhere. They outnumber, other animals. They outnumber plants. They outnumber vertebrates, or things with a backbone. They're way far ahead of us. We estimate that in the world, we probably have about 9 million species in total. So we have a lot left to discover. A lot of them are in remote places of the earth that we can't access yet, or they're too small for us to find, or they are so shy, so to speak, that they're harder to find. The last type of diversity is ecosystem diversity. This is literally looking at different ecosystems around the world. And ecosystems exist mainly because of climate. When you're at the equator, it's really warm. You go a little bit further, you get more moisture. Go a little further, you get a lot drier, so thinking about deserts. Then you're starting to get cooler. Eventually you reach the poles. So climate is really affecting our ecosystems and the diversity of ecosystems. Those ecosystems dictate what species are there. A polar bear can't live in the desert. A cactus can't live in a tropical rainforest. So these ecosystems are actually really important for breeding, so to speak, species biodiversity. Now, in a hypothetical dream world, ecosystem diversity is what we would protect. We would conserve ecosystems. If we protect this forest, if we protect this desert, in essence, you protect all the species in that ecosystem. But ecosystems are large. People want to use those ecosystems. People want to chop down trees. People want to fill wetlands. And so although, yes, ideally we should protect ecosystem diversity before species diversity, before genetic diversity, it's also the hardest one to protect because they're literally large and they have a lot of resources that humans want to use. So again, biodiversity is looking at that variety of life at a genetics level, which can be incredibly important to survival. At the species level, which is what we focus on most at the conservation level, and we can measure that diversity in different ways through species richness, evenness, and the diversity index. And then finally, ideally, we would study and conserve at the ecosystem level. But due to various restraints in our human population, we usually don't see that.